Friday Night Lights of Ash Grove. This is a true story about a high school football number that was never supposed to be reissued, and a player who didn't survive wearing it twice. What happened on that field over one season still doesn't have an explanation, and I was the one wearing the jersey when it happened. I grew up in a small town in rural Texas, the kind of place where high school football wasn't just a sport, it was religion. Every Friday night, the whole town shut down and packed into the stadium, and for 3 hours, nothing else mattered. I played wide receiver for the Ash Grove Hawks for 2 years, and I thought I knew everything there was to know about that field. I was wrong, and what happened during my senior season is something I still can't fully explain, even years later. It started with a story the older players told the freshmen every year, the kind of thing you assume is just tradition, a scare tactic to haze the new kids. They said that back in the 1970s, a player named Danny Whitfield had collapsed on that field during a game in the fourth quarter and never gotten back up. The story went that the coach at the time refused to forfeit. So the team finished the game anyway, just a few hundred feet from where Danny had fallen. After that season, his number 34 was never officially retired, but it quietly stopped being issued, year after year, without anyone really discussing why. I'd heard the story a dozen times growing up and never thought twice about it. Until the season I was handed number 34. The equipment manager said it was a clerical mistake, a new hire who didn't know the unspoken rule. And by the time anyone higher up noticed, the jerseys had already been printed and the season was about to start. I remember a few of the older guys on the team going quiet when they saw the number on my locker, the kind of quiet that makes the hair on your arms stand up even before anything's happened. I laughed it off in front of them. Privately, I asked my coach if I could switch numbers. He told me, a little too quickly, that there wasn't time to reorder and that it was just a number. I believed him because I wanted to. The first few games of the season were normal. Good even. We won our opener by 3 touchdowns and I caught the go-ahead score in week 2. It was during week 3, a home game under the stadium lights, that things started to feel wrong in a way I couldn't put into words. I remember standing in the huddle during a timeout, glancing toward the far end zone and seeing a figure standing just outside the fence line, beyond where the stadium lights reached. Not in the bleachers, not near the gate, just standing in the dark grass past the end zone, perfectly still, facing the field. I assumed it was a parent who'd wandered off to take a phone call. I didn't think about it again until I noticed the same figure in the same spot during the next home game. By week 5, other guys on the team started mentioning it too. Though none of us said much out loud at first, the way teenage boys don't want to be the first one to admit they're scared. Our tight end, a guy named Marcus, finally said something out loud in the locker room after practice. He said that every time he lined up near the sideline closest to that end of the field, he felt like the temperature dropped, even in late Texas heat that didn't drop below 80 degrees most nights. A couple other guys nodded along like they'd felt it too, but hadn't wanted to say anything. The team trainer, an older man named Coach Reyes, who'd been with the program for almost 30 years, overheard us talking about it one evening while wrapping an ankle in the training room. He didn't laugh at us, which honestly scared me more than if he had. He just got quiet, set down the roll of tape, and asked which end of the field we meant. When we told him, he nodded slowly and said that was the exact spot where Danny Whitfield had gone down in 1978. He said it like it was simple historical fact, the same tone he'd used to tell us about a knee injury protocol. Then he told us something that none of the senior players had ever mentioned in any version of the story I'd grown up hearing. That Danny hadn't just collapsed from heat or exhaustion the way the official story claimed, according to Reyes, who'd heard it from a trainer who worked that exact game. Danny had been completely fine in the third quarter, full of energy, talking trash to the other team. Then in the fourth quarter, he suddenly went stiff mid-play, dropped straight down without bracing for the fall, and was gone before the ambulance even reached the stadium gates. Ray said the family never got a clear answer on cause of death, and that the school quietly settled something with them a year later, the details of which nobody outside the administration ever saw. I wish I could say I left it there. I didn't. Something about wearing his old number made me feel like I owed it to him, or maybe to myself, to actually understand what had happened. Instead of just being scared of a story, I went to the town library on a Saturday and dug through old newspaper archives on microfilm, something I'd never done before in my life. The local paper's coverage of the game was short and strange, focused almost entirely on the final score, with only a brief, oddly clinical mention near the bottom that a player had been taken ill during the fourth quarter and later passed at the hospital. There was no follow-up article the next week, no obituary that I could find in that paper at all, which struck me as deeply wrong for a town this small, where even minor traffic accidents got a full write-up. It was like the story had been deliberately kept short, the way you'd handle something you wanted forgotten quickly, rather than mourned properly. Week 7 was an away game, so for the first time all season, we didn't play on that field. And for 1 week, everything felt completely normal again. I started to think maybe the whole thing had just been a string of coincidences, amplified by an old ghost story and some nervous teenage imagination. Then week 8 brought us back home, and that belief didn't survive the night. We were up by 10 points in the fourth quarter, driving down the field, and I lined up wide on the side closest to that same dark patch beyond the end zone. As I set my stance, I glanced toward the fence the way I had a dozen times before, almost out of habit at that point. The figure was there again, except this time, for the first time all season, it wasn't standing still. It was walking, slow and steady, parallel to the sideline, matching our pace down the field, staying just past the edge of where the lights reached, so I could never get a clear look at a face or even confirm it was fully human-shaped, rather than just a trick of shadow and distance. I missed the snap count because I couldn't look away from it. My quarterback had to call timeout because I'd frozen completely in my route, staring into the dark. In the huddle, I tried to explain what I'd seen, and I expected someone to make fun of me. Nobody did. Marcus said he'd seen it too, from his angle on the other side of the field, and described the same slow, matching walk along the sideline. Our quarterback, who up until that point had stayed completely silent on the subject all season, finally admitted that he'd seen something out there every single home game, but had assumed it was just nerves from being a first-year starter, something he hadn't wanted to admit out loud to a team that already had enough on its mind. We finished that game on autopilot, nobody playing with the focus we normally had, and we barely held on to the win. In the locker room afterward, Coach Reyes pulled me aside, alone, away from the rest of the team. He told me, quietly, that in all his decades with the program, this was the first season he could remember the sightings happening this often, this clearly, to this many players at once. He said the only other seasons anything like this had happened, as far as he knew from old stories passed down by trainers before him, was the season immediately after Danny died, when the number 34 had briefly been reissued to another player before the school quietly pulled it from circulation for good. He looked at me for a long moment and asked, very directly, if I wanted to keep wearing that number for the rest of the season. I said yes, because I was 18 stubborn and didn't want to be the guy who got spooked out of his own jersey number by a story. I think about that decision more than almost any other decision I made that year. The final home game of the regular season was in Week 11, a rivalry game against a school from the next county over, the kind of game where the whole town turns out regardless of the team's record. I remember warming up under the lights, the stands already nearly full an hour before kickoff, and glancing toward that same dark stretch beyond the end zone out of habit. This time, the figure wasn't past the fence at all. It was standing just inside it, on the actual edge of the field, closer than it had ever been in any game that season. Close enough that for one frozen second under the stadium lights, I was almost certain I could make out the shape of an old, faded jersey, though I've never been able to convince myself that detail was real, and not something my mind built out of fear and bad lighting. I didn't tell anyone before kickoff. I didn't want to be the reason the team lost focus in the biggest game of the year. We played hard that night, and with under 2 minutes left, down by 4 points, I ran a deep route along that exact sideline, the same patch of grass where Danny had gone down decades earlier, where I'd spent an entire season watching a shadow pace back and forth. I caught the ball in stride. Nothing touched me, no contact from any defender, and yet my legs simply stopped working beneath me, like the signal from my brain to my feet had been cut clean. I went down hard, untouched, the ball still in my hands, and for a few seconds, according to teammates who described it to me afterward, I wasn't breathing. I don't remember any of that part. The next clear memory I have is waking up in the back of an ambulance, an EMT, shining a light in my eyes and asking me to count backward from 10, the stadium lights and the screaming crowd visible through the open back doors, shrinking smaller as we pulled away. At the hospital, they ran every test they could think of: heart, lungs, concussion protocol, blood work, and found absolutely nothing wrong with me. No medical explanation for why an 18-year-old in perfect health simply stopped breathing for roughly 30 seconds on a football field, untouched, mid-stride, in the exact spot where another player had died decades before me. I didn't play again that season. I told my coach I was done, and for once, nobody argued with me or tried to talk me out of it. Coach Reyes came to see me at home a few days later, and he told me, gently but firmly, that the jersey wasn't going back into circulation after that year, this time for good. No more clerical mistakes, no more loopholes. He said the school had finally agreed, quietly, to retire the number, although officially, to this day, there's no plaque, no ceremony, nothing publicly stated about why, just an empty space on the roster where 34 used to occasionally, accidentally, get issued. I never went back to that field after I left the team, not even for senior night, not even to watch from the stands with everyone else in town. I still don't have an explanation for what happened to me that night, and I've made peace with the fact that I probably never will. But sometimes, when I'm half asleep, I think about that figure pacing the sideline, matching our pace down the field, getting closer with every passing week, like it had been waiting decades for someone to finally wear that number again and step exactly where it needed them to step. And I wonder if I'd switched jerseys back in August, like I'd asked to, whether it would have simply waited for whoever wore it next.